Welcome everybody. It's really wonderful to see everybody. And I just posted in chat, I don't know if everyone can see it, but it turns out that it's the 80th anniversary of National Disability Employment Awareness Month. I didn't realize that this was established in 1945. It's older than the ADA, which is fascinating. I also put a link to our full lineup of events in chat and can repost that as people are arriving. I'm going to self-accommodate and read kind of the purpose of us setting up this lineup of events this month and what our intentions are. I also want to say I'm very excited that Rachel is here, and Brian's going to give a much better introduction in a moment once I'm finished reading directly from the text on our ERG website, because I'm having a day today and worried I'll get lost if I try to do this without a prompt. So turning off distractions right now. Okay. So for National Disability Employment Awareness Month, we've organized activities that celebrate our community and provide opportunities for MIT faculty, staff, and students to experience growth and belonging. Additional events will follow as we continue discovering, and what we mean by that is after this series of events, we're hoping to continue to plan events that will be ongoing. As we continue discovering innovative approaches to education, event planning, policy development, business practices, and our daily interactions that account for the full spectrum of human experience. We hope these sessions inspire reimagining of policy and practice at local levels. Watch parties are encouraged to support team discussions and planning in response to what is learned. So contact me or Brian if you have any questions or thoughts in response to all of this. But again, so excited that you're all here today. Very excited that Rachel is here to share with us. And I'm going to hand it over to Brian to do a proper introduction.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Murnoff. I'm the other co-lead of the Disabilities Staff Employee Resource Group here. And so this talk today, we're going to split into two parts. So we'll have Rachel's talk, and then we'll have a question and answer section. We're going to record the talk, but we're not going to record the question and answer to allow for some freer conversation there. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask during the presentation, please throw them either in the chat or the question and answer box, and we'll curate those. And then during the Q&A, if you'd prefer to say your question out loud, either raise your hand, or if you need to, you can say it out loud that you have a question, and we'll ask you to say it. So with that, I'm excited to introduce Rachel Tanenhaus. She is the ADA Coordinator and Executive Director for the City of Cambridge Commission for Persons with Disabilities. She spent nearly 12 years as a program coordinator in the Health and Disability Program at the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, has provided technical assistance on the Americans with Disabilities Act for 25 years, has been participating in disability awareness panels since she was 10 years old, and was an information specialist on the ADA technical assistance lines at the New England ADA Center and U.S. Department of Justice. She holds degrees from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst and Boston University School of Public Health, and has served on several municipal disability commissions and on the Alumni Council for the Guide Dog Foundation for the Blind. Rachel has also played a large role in shaping the way that I personally approach inclusive design, accessibility, and advocacy in the workplace, having advised our inclusive design efforts at the MIT Museum a few years ago. In her spare time, she loves to read, write, travel, volunteer, and spend way too much time on the internet, watch baseball and women's hockey. So with that, I give you Rachel Tanenhaus.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. It is really awesome to be here. Rachel Tanenhaus, she, her, hers. I am a big old white woman with purple and blonde hair. Need to touch up the purple, get it back to my natural purple. Wearing a flowered blouse and sitting in front of a file cabinet that is basically festooned with, you know, bumper stickers and all that, because I don't have a bumper, but I do have a file cabinet. So thank you all very much for being here. Let's do some housekeeping first. I'm very pleased that other people are looking at whether or not there are questions, because I may or may not actually be able to see that going on, but I love questions. It means that you're actually awake. And I want to encourage you at any point in time during this presentation to do what you need to do for your body or your brain. If we can't provide access in this presentation, then I clearly should not be giving it in the first place. So, you know, if you need to take breaks, if you need to have a snack, if you need to go to the bathroom or grab water or fidget or do whatever you got to do, you go right ahead and do it. I probably can't see you anyway. So do what you need to do. So I do have some slides, but not very many. This is mostly going to be conceptual. There's not a quiz on Tuesday, and there's not a lot you need to memorize, but there's a couple of things I thought it might be useful to have in writing. So let me bring up these slides one second. I have a lot of windows open, and that was a poor life choice on my part. Let me grab sharing.
Hey, Rachel, while you're looking, I'm just going to share with people that one thing we forgot to mention was that it's helpful if people state their name when speaking for a variety of reasons. It helps the ASL interpreters know quickly who's talking, and anyone who can't see the screen, that helps them know who's talking also.
Yes. Okay. That makes sense. Yes. Thank you. All right. So basically, we're going to be talking about making inclusion and can people see the slides? First of all.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
Making inclusion and accessibility part of all your work. Because I know people do lots of different things at MIT. It is not all professorial, although some of it is. But there are also people who are there doing admin tasks and you know, logistical and infrastructure related tasks and all kinds of things happening there. And so like this applies to you too. So I'm gonna, let's see, what happens if, haha, love it. So I want to talk a little bit about what my office does real quick, because as MIT and most universities can be a little bit self-contained. And so you have your own disability related offices. You may or may not actually know about mine. So we are here to help. Literally, we are here to help and we cannot charge you for it. So you may as well use it because we are the government. So feel free to ask us questions. You can contact us with questions about any number of things. If you are interviewing people, or you are being interviewed and you want to know what questions are and are not permitted in terms of disability rights laws, we are here to answer those questions, or rather not to answer the interview questions, but to let you know what you can and can't do. If you want to know about how to request reasonable accommodations, I will absolutely be talking about this, but also fielding accommodation requests. One thing that the American workforce is not good at doing is letting people know what their requirements are actually as supervisors. And it turns out if you want to advance far enough in your career, you have to eventually supervise people, whether you want to or not, and whether you have been trained on it or not. And so a lot of people get very scared about anything having to do with the ADA because they don't have the information we need. We're here to give you the information you need. If you have questions about the rights of service animals, we are very happy to answer those. Providing good customer service to people with disabilities, whatever customer service means in your particular context. Effective communication with people with disabilities. We provide training and technical assistance. I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm here doing that right now. We are small but mighty. There are 3 of us. And we provide outreach to the disability community because nothing about us without us. Everybody who works here has a disability, and we all want to make sure we hear the voices of the people that are impacted by the work that we do. We do lots of different things. So if you have questions about any of those things, you can contact us and we will do our level best to answer those questions, or let you know when we don't have the answers and research them because we are nerds. So I'm gonna, one second, there we go. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about what a disability is and who has one. Because it turns out, fun fact, there are about 40 different federal definitions of disability, and at no point did anyone attempt to sync them up with each other. And so there are many different contexts for disability, for talking about what disability is. And so, for example, me, if I am requesting an accommodation at my job under the definition of disability under the ADA, which I'm about to talk about, I do have a disability. If I go down the hall to Veteran Services and I ask them about the Veteran Administration's definition of disability, I don't exist. I don't compute because I've never been a veteran. If I am looking at Social Security, I do not have a disability under the definition because I can hold down a job. So none of those things are synced up. The one you need to worry about in this context at this time is the Americans with Disabilities Act. The ADA is a federal law. It covers the entire United States, and it still exists, I swear to God. And it's been around for 35 years. We just celebrated the 35th anniversary. And so it is an anti-discrimination law that indicates that you cannot or should not, under the law, discriminate or treat people worse because they have a disability. And it does have a definition of disability. And the nice thing about this definition, the not nice thing, is that under no circumstances is anything in the ADA written in plain English. So sorry, they don't actually expect anyone to understand it without an explanation. The good news is that this definition is functional. It doesn't actually have to do with what your diagnosis is. And I'll explain to you why that's a good thing after I explain to you this, after I go over the definition. Under the ADA, you have a disability if you have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. There are many different major life activities. I am not going to give you an exhaustive list, but there isn't an exhaustive list, but one of the like examples: seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, walking, that sort of thing, but also things like social interaction, things like executive function, things like decision making, those kinds of things, and also stuff you don't think of off the top of your head. So, for example, major bodily systems working as designed, or and that includes things like, can you fight off disease? Turns out having an immune system is a major life activity. That is an example. Normal cell division is a major life activity, which is why cancer is often a disability. Those are things that are not as immediately obvious, but they can count as a disability. I'm not going to hand you a list of diagnoses that are always disabilities, because it turns out two people can have the exact same diagnosis that shows up completely differently in them. And so the question is, are you substantially limited in one or more major life activities? The other two prongs of this definition are, do you have a history or record of such an impairment? Which means that if you had cancer and you have since recovered from it, first of all, congratulations. And second of all, that means that you should not be discriminated against for having had it in the past, even if you don't have it now. So an employer, to give an example, can't find out that you had cancer and be like, well, what if you get it again? Or they can't find out you're in recovery and be like, well, what if there's a relapse? That is not something that they can take into consideration when determining whether or not to hire you or keep you on or give you what you need in the job, or in your work, in your schoolwork, in your anything. Okay. And the third thing is whether or not you're regarded by others of having such an impairment. You may not have any impairment at all, but for example, for somebody who has, say, some sort of significant facial difference, there is nothing that functionally that impacts their functioning at all. But people look at them and think there's an issue. Well, we can't put you at the front desk because you look like a particular way. Now, so those are people who are covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So that's just to let you know who I'm talking about in this case when I'm talking about who has a disability. Now, what I have nothing to say. I never have nothing to say, but work with me on this. I have nothing to say about your identity. What you call yourself at home is your business. I care because I am that flavor of nerd that I will gladly get into the weeds with you about that, but it is none of my business. So you can be eligible for accommodations and not ever call yourself disabled in your head, or frankly, in your mouth, or whatever, because it's none of my business how you see yourself. But if you have some sort of functional impairment that goes under this definition, there may be things that can help you work on a level playing field, even if you don't want to take on the label of disabled. which many people have reasons why they might not want to. I take it on myself. I spent the weekend at a disability pride event. I don't have any problem with that particular label for myself. However, there are a lot of people who, for example, don't take it on. Folks who are culturally deaf tend to see themselves as a linguistic and cultural minority rather than have disabled. They are, in fact, a linguistic and cultural minority. They're not wrong. So it is none of my business whether or not they call themselves disabled. Somebody who has acquired a disability, and most disabilities are acquired, may not be ready to take on that particular label. We are told from the moment we are born that having or acquiring a disability is the worst thing that can happen to us. That is a lie. We are being lied to, okay? It's really not like that. Speaking as someone who has been doing this for nearly 52 years, it is not the most difficult part of my life by any means. And I have a relatively privileged life. But, okay, we all swim in that swamp muck. Internalized ableism is alive and well. Systemic ableism is alive and well. So if you aren't ready for that particular label, I get it. A lot of stuff has happened during the pandemic where people were like, I had this health condition and I just thought of it as a health condition, but it turns out it can kill me. Do I have a disability? Lots of people have come to me and had that conversation, and they've never had to think about it before. But also, as you're aging, if you live long enough, you will acquire a disability. So, live a long time and come join the cool kids. So literally, live long and prosper. So, not everybody is going to jump right on that definition. That's okay. It is not like I said, it is not based on your diagnosis. You can request accommodations and not have a formal diagnosis. And I'm going to explain to you why that's true. Again, there's nothing in the definition of disability that says you have to even tell anybody what your diagnosis is. You have to have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. I don't care what it's called, okay? I recognize that saying that you have to have a diagnosis in a world where these things are not universally covered by insurance, I don't think the people who wrote the law kept that in mind, but it's a reality that not everybody is able to run right out and get the diagnosis that they're pretty sure that they have. But you may be able to find a professional who will acknowledge that you are substantially limited and talk about what major life activities you're substantially limited in and provide that amount of documentation. And that's actually all you need to get accommodations, say, on the job or at school. You don't have to tell anybody what your diagnosis is. What you do have to have is, and I want to tell you straight off the bat that providers do not get trained on this stuff. So they are historically, and it's not their fault, they're historically crap at it. They do not have anybody telling them this. So you may have to coach them. So when you're getting documentation and I will get, by the way, to how to make things accessible for people who have disabilities. I am talking to everybody, but right now this part is for folks who have a disability or may have a disability. In the documentation, all you need to be able to provide is the major life activity in which you are substantially limited, the thing that you are requesting as an accommodation, and the straight line between the two. You do not have to send like a zillion pages of your medical records or anything like that. Please don't. Nobody needs that. But your provider they could just be like, yep, this sure is my patient, and send that in and call that documentation. You might have to hold their hand a little bit. So if you are in a situation where you need to provide documentation to get an accommodation, like to the school or to an employer or something like that, do not give them your whole life. They're not entitled to your whole life. But I've had people say to me, I don't have a formal diagnosis, so I can't get accommodations. And I need you to know that's not true. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about accommodations. Accommodations are needs. There is a phrase that a lot of people use. You have all heard the phrase special needs. It is not like nobody has come out and said you can't use that phrase or anything like that. For me personally, it makes my teeth itch. Because you hear about children with special needs. Have you met a child without them? Because I sure haven't. And the fact of the matter is that everybody has needs. Needs are human. The problem is when you have a disability, they're considered special. And by that, I mean more burdensome. Also a lie. Your needs are not more burdensome than anybody else's. Needs are absolutely normal. And I'm going to tell a story, and I'm going to get a little verklempt in this story because the person I'm telling it about, I just lost. She's no longer with us. But if we had gone to my friend Sassy's house, all right, and we'd gone and get, back when she was still around, I hear she was an amazing cook. We'd all gone there for dinner. She would have turned the lights on for us because we have this peculiar need for light in order to function in a space, right? Sassy did not have eyes. She had prosthetics. She had no light perception. She absolutely did not need to put the lights on. She didn't need to spend the money on her electric bill. She doesn't need to do that for us. But you know what? She would have done it because she's not a freaking monster. And we have these needs. Nobody ever talks about the need to have the lights on as a special need. But in fact, it is a need that is, because it's normalized, right? It's a need. There is nothing, just because your need is attached to a disability doesn't mean that it's any more burdensome than anybody else's need. And I'm going to come right out and say that just because it costs money doesn't mean it's automatically more problematic. All right. I'm not going to lie to you. Our civil rights in the ADA have an undue burden clause. It's in there and it sends a message. But I am telling you, just empirically speaking, it's okay. You are allowed to have needs. We live in a world that was not built for us, and therefore we have needs. Systemic and internalized ableism are very much alive and well, like I said. I want to talk for a second about stigma. One of the reasons why people do not ask for accommodations is they don't know what they need. But another one is that they are afraid to do so. They don't want to be labeled. That's real. I'm not going to tell you it's not real, because we wouldn't have this law if we didn't need it, right? If people weren't out there doing discriminatory stuff. And the existence of the law did not stop those things from happening. It just means there is a system for possible consequences. And some disabilities are more stigmatized than others. So you're not wrong that that exists. But I have to tell you that if you don't disclose, you're not entitled to accommodations. I believe that we should make things as inclusive as possible in general, baking that in. But if you have needs that are not being met in a situation, nobody legally has to provide you with an accommodation unless you disclose and ask for it. And that's actually good, because you don't want someone else deciding what you need. And disability history is littered with horrific stories of people deciding what is best for us. So let's not perpetuate that, right? What I am trying to say here is that disability is a normal part of human experience. And so, but it's not treated like it. So yes, it is true that there is some risk in disclosing. Discrimination still happens. The reason why I'm out here doing my job is to try to make it less likely to happen. But I can't protect everybody from everything, even when I try. So I just want to say that that risk is real, but also there is a requirement to ask for what you need in order to get what you need in a lot of situations. Also, we're living in a world where some people don't want to take on another label right now just because of what is going on and the particular ways the world is on fire at this time. That is also real. I'm not going to tell you it's not. But again, I will tell you that there is more safety in numbers, that you are not alone, that the community is out there. Sometimes we fight like any community, but we are absolutely out there. And one of the things that ableism does, internalized ableism does, is it tells you have to go through this alone. You do not. You do not. One of the interesting things is that I hang out with a lot of nerds and geeks. Some of you are on this call. if I did not do that thing, I would not have a social life. And it is my understanding that there are perhaps a few nerds and geeks in the MIT community. I think it is worth examining that culture, which I love many things about it. But there are some parts of it that play into ableism that need to be looked at. For example, if you don't suffer enough for your work, you're doing it wrong. Tool until you die. If you died before you got the tooling done, you clearly weren't cut out for this. That's not how that works. People have a variety of needs, and telling people to work through what their bodies and brains are telling them is ableist. And the fact that you have different needs does not make you lesser. And I think we need to look at that in the culture. The other thing is this idea that we are the before part of a science fiction story, and eventually they're going to cure us and we won't be a problem anymore. Not everybody is looking for a cure. Some people are, but some of us actually feel pretty normalized with how we are. And, we feel like we are not actually the problem here. So I feel like those are some things to examine in nerd and geek culture, which I am absolutely not going to solve today. So I want to talk about how to get what you need. I recommend doing as much as possible in writing if you are comfortable doing so and able to do so, because it tends to leave a paper trail if things go wrong. That having been said, I have been doing this disability thing, having a disability for a very long time. It is very normal in my life. Normal is what you wake up with in the morning, right? It is perfectly normal to me for me to need what I need. And so I just walk up and have a conversation with someone and say, hey, are we cool? And as far as I'm concerned, that's all there should be to it, but we don't live in that world. So those are just a little bit of information about overall about disability, about what the definition is of disability, that sort of thing. I'm going to see what my next slide is. Hold on a second. Oh, okay. This is just my contact information. I can put it up at the end. I am going to unshare. And then hey, look, there's all these people. How cool is that? So I want to talk.
Rachel, it's Amy. Rachel, it's Amy. Did you want to break for 2 seconds in case people have questions about this element of the talk before you segue into the next?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Sounds good.
Do people have questions?
There are 3 things that the documentation in general should have. The major life activity in which you are substantially limited, because that's the definition, right? That's what we're talking about here. What is the thing that makes you a person with a disability? Again, doesn't have to be the diagnosis. And honestly, most people who are receiving documentation shouldn't be making medical decisions anyway. So why would you have to hand them your diagnosis? So the major life activity in which you're substantially limited, the thing you're asking for in the first place, and how those 2 things are related. Many providers are so excited to have their very own letterhead, which same, and they will cheerfully write you a whole creative writing exercise on there that has none of the information that you actually need. So that is the kind of thing that you need on the job. It may be the kind of thing you need in an educational setting, might be the kind of thing you need in a housing related setting. The exception is if you are applying for a program that is attached to your particular type of disability. So for example, if you are applying to a program for autistic people, you might need to prove you're autistic. I don't know what to tell you, right? This is not asking for an accommodation thing. This is a program for which there's an eligibility criterion and you are showing that you have met that criterion. That's a different kind of a situation. But if what you're asking for is accommodations so you can do the same stuff everybody else is doing, nobody gets to go on a romp through your private life and your medical files and God knows what all. Also, if you are an employee with a disability, you should be aware that any kind of information related to your disability, your medical, anything like that, must be kept separately, legally must be kept separately from your personnel files. Nobody should be able to look in your personnel files and find out about your disability. There are laws about that. So keep that in mind. That is one thing to know when you're disclosing, is that like, that doesn't mean that like the head of whoever is gonna, of some department is gonna look and be, boo, disability. It's not gonna be like that. At least if they're doing things the way they ought to.
Rachel, this is Amy. I found the ADA link that describes that information about substantial limitations in major life activities.
Yes, yes.
Is that what you're asking about? Is that part of what you were asking for? Is that list of things?
So I want to talk a little bit, well, I want to quickly also say, a lot of people, especially if you acquire a disability, you don't know what you need yet. So first of all, finding your community can be very helpful, but also it can be, you may not know how to do that. I apparently can't go through a presentation without bringing up this particular website, but it's not, it is intended for employment, but it can also be a really good resource in general. It's called the Job Accommodation Network. I'm going to put it in the chat. AskJan.org. It's called Jan. I believe it's still up and running. It is federally funded. So ask me next week. But as of right now, it still exists. They're fantastic. First of all, they're exactly the flavor of nerd that loves looking into these things. But even if you don't want to talk to a human, their website is great. And they help people come up with job accommodations. But also, it turns out a lot of your job accommodations will also work in an educational setting, that kind of thing, or just in life. They have their lists sorted two different ways. They've got it sorted by, by disability, by diagnosis, but they've also got another list sorted by major life activity. So if you know that, so if the thing you're having issues with, this is what other people sometimes do if they have that going on. And I find that a really useful list. And if you've got something that's real tricky, you can call them up and they love figuring stuff out. But I use them all the time. They are a fantastic, fantastic resource. So that is, there are different ways to figure out what you need. You may not know yet. And also, needs change. People are squishy. I believe that's the technical term. And so you may try something and it doesn't work. Or it may work for your friend who has the same diagnosis, but it doesn't work for you. It's okay. Things don't have to be set in stone. You can change your mind about what you need, and that is allowed. And in fact, that's normal. That's usual, especially if you are somebody whose disability fluctuates from day to day. There are plenty of people who wake up in the morning and they don't know whether they're going to be able to move or how much brain fog they're going to have or what they're going to be able to see. And that is just the way their disability goes. And so you may have different needs on different days, and that is okay. But I do recommend planning for them ahead of time, because when you're feeling good, you're like, I don't got to do this right now. I'm fine. And when you're feeling not good, you don't have the wherewithal to do it anymore and everything's on fire. So I think that planning for these things, if you do have a disability that waxes and wanes or that is progressive or anything like that, planning when you're doing well and planning for your worst possible day is going to do right by you in the end, even if it's a pain and you really don't want to. I get the don't want to thing. But really, that is going to save you, because it turns out when you have, it turns out like on the job, for example, if you didn't request the accommodations you need and then things went poorly because you didn't have the accommodations you needed, that boss didn't know. And you are still responsible for the things that went poorly. Because who knew, right? They weren't gonna presume. So that's why I'm saying, like, even if you're not sure, and when to disclose is an incredibly controversial topic that, like, nobody in the disability world can agree on. So I don't have an answer for you, but my point is that eventually you will probably have to if you're going to have some needs, and you should be realistic with yourself about what your needs are going to be. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to make things as accessible and inclusive as possible. And why. There's a lot of reasons. First of all, the law says that we have to provide access, and also morally, it's kind of a good idea. And I would like to think that everybody here has a functional moral apparatus. I want to talk a little bit about the curb ramp principle. Curb ramps, we have all seen curb ramps on the corner, right? Or at the intersections. And the thing about it is that those things were originally designed for folks who use wheelchairs or some sort of mobility device, so that they get on and off the sidewalk and cross the street. And they are very good for those things, but it turns out they're a godsend for people with baby carriages. And they're really great if you're wheeling luggage. And remember when people were rollerblading lots of places and like inline skates, that kind of thing? And so those people love them too. And it turns out that when you do something that works well for people with disabilities, it generally works pretty well for people without disabilities too. I absolutely believe that. And I also believe that it wouldn't matter, that to me, it wouldn't matter if that weren't true, because if somebody needs a thing, that's still important. Like, what if my rights and needs didn't benefit people without disabilities? Would they not count anymore? I don't think so. I think that they would still be important. So I think that the curb cut principle is really useful for arguing to people without disabilities why they should respect our needs and our rights. And also, I sort of have mixed feelings about them, because like, if that weren't there, we'd still have needs and rights. But access helps everyone. We already talked about how needs change over time. There is no us and them. I have been to so many meetings where people are like, well, those people, and I'm like, right here, look me in the face, talk to me. You can't talk about them. I am right here. And that's the thing, that we live among you. Like, I don't think that there's anybody, obviously this is a self-selecting group. You came here because it was of some interest. I don't think anybody made you do it, but like, anybody at MIT either has a disability, knows somebody with disabilities. Some of you guys might be a little neurospicy. Yeah, a little bit. You count, right? Like, again, I don't know or care what you call yourself at home, but you count. So what I'm saying is that this is something that impacts a whole lot of people, and there is no us and them. And disabilities, like I said, most disabilities are acquired. So like, there really isn't any us and them. This is an all of us kind of issue. I always recommend that people make information redundant, have more than one way that people can get information. It turns out that some people are visual learners, and some people are auditory learners, and some people are more haptic or kinetic or tactile. And that may or may not have anything to do with whether or not you have a disability. In a rush of extreme humor, I am a visual learner. I am legally blind, okay? But here we are. And so there are ways that I absorb information better, and they don't have anything to do with my disability, but it turns out that there are many people who have styles of learning that are very much related to their disability. And if you provide information in a visual way and an auditory way, etc., then you are more likely to reach more people, whether or not they have a disability. And you don't have to single people out. Nobody has to say in a presentation, I am verbalizing this because Rachel can't tell what's on the slides. You can just do it and make it part of how you do things. I think that it's really important that you take into consideration that people are entire people. And so their experience as a person with a disability absolutely colors what's going on. But the experience of a Black person with a disability, or a trans person with a disability, or any of those things going on is absolutely going to color what happens. And for example, I'm just going to give you this example. This country has a pretty solidly evil, but solid policy of warehousing Black and brown people with psychiatric disabilities in prisons. That is, the school to prison pipeline is real, and it is very, very tied to disability and to disability diagnosis. And so you need to know, when you are working with people with disabilities, that they bring their whole experience there. And for example, the way that an autistic Black person is treated is very, out there in the world, is very different from the way an autistic white person is treated. And we can't ignore that. The threshold for what people consider acceptable behavior is held differently for different kinds of people. Also, having needs, taking up space, depending on what kind of person you are, those things are treated differently. Women are raised not to have needs. Trans people aren't even allowed to pee without it being a federal case, okay? So elimination is a need. So what I'm saying here is you have to see the whole person. And you have to know that what they're bringing in is going to be different depending on what they got going on. And when you do that, you need to be aware of the power dynamics. If you are a man talking to a woman with a disability, you need to understand that the things that come out of your mouth and the way that you say them are going to land differently because of how men in this society have treated women, whether or not you intended it to be that way. And the fact that it's a woman with a disability adds to that. So developing a sensitivity for power dynamics is really important. I also recognize that this is a little harder to do if you yourself are, say, autistic or some other flavor of neurospicy and have difficult picking up on social cues. I did not say this was easy. I also never said that accessibility needs never clash. I want to be really clear that access, anybody who tells you that access is simple and never contradictory is lying to you. So sometimes access needs will clash and you deal with that on a case-by-case basis. Let's see. One of the most important things you can do is presume competence. And how do you presume competence? Well, remember that the person is good at being who they are. You are not good at being them. You don't know what they need. They are not good at being you. They don't know what you need. They are the expert on them. And if some of you with disabilities, and I do this, are sitting here going, I am a chaos muppet. I am not any good at being me. Okay, but you're better at it than anybody else is. And so certainly better at it than anybody else who would be asking you what your needs were or meeting your needs. So keep in mind that, hold on, there we go. Keep in mind that, like, this person knows what they need. And if not, you can work on it together. Also, people without disabilities are not good at having an imagination about what people with disabilities can do. People tell me all the time, blind people can't do X, usually over the phone because it means they haven't met me. And I'm like, I did that twice before breakfast. So if somebody believes they can do a thing, I'm not going out trying to drive a bus, all right? Believe people. We are often framed as people with disabilities in terms of our deficits. We have strengths, just like everybody else. I don't want to move the bar for what our strengths are, okay? There's a lot of stuff out there where people get very excited because we went out the door and we functioned, okay? That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that every person has strengths. And the fact that somebody has a disability doesn't mean that they don't. It doesn't mean that things that were otherwise wouldn't be strengths in anybody else are strengths necessarily in them just because they happen to have a disability. Also, people with disabilities take risks. There is a concept called the dignity of risk. Everything should be accessible, even if it's the stuff that people think is hinky, all right? Like, people with disabilities smoke, drink, and watch porn. I don't know what to tell you. We do all the stuff that everybody else does. And so therefore, there's this idea that if I try to make this accessible, a person will take a risk and we need to keep them in a bubble. That is not true. Also bear in mind that one size does not fit all. I am a big girl. I'm a plus size girl, and I'm here to tell you that one size fits all is true, never has been true, but also that is true for accessibility as well. Again, you have two people with the same diagnosis. That doesn't mean anything about what they need. I recommend asking people about their needs. One of the things I do as a supervisor is I ask everybody who works for me whether or not they have a disability. As it happens right now, they do, but that hasn't always been the case. What do you need in order to be able to function well, happily, and productively and comfortably in this job? That is something you should want to know about your students. That is something you should want to know about your coworkers. That is something you should want to know about your employees. What do they need? And it normalizes needs. I ask people that whether or not they have a disability, but the fact of the matter is that means they get to let me know. It opens the door for letting me know about disability-related needs. You try to foster independence with what you're doing. Make sure if people got forms they got to fill out, processes, All of that is made as accessible as possible for as many people as possible, but do offer help if somebody needs the help. If they ask you for help, don't be like, well, I thought I did that right, but make sure that all of the processes that are part of participating in whatever it is you're doing, whatever you're putting out there, people can do as much as possible. Also, even though this is a university and it is a learning environment, people with disabilities are not Exhibit A. They are not there to be your free research, and we are not there to, oh, please tell me all about your boundaries are a thing. So please tell me all about your personal and medical life is not a thing that will make anybody feel welcome unless they ask you if they can tell you that thing. But also, if they are the first, you already are working with people with disabilities or teaching people with disabilities or whatever. But if they're the first one you know about, they just are showing up for the same reason everybody else is. They want to work at the job. They want to take your class and learn about the thing. They want to, they do not get subjected to any different scrutiny than anybody else does. Ask what people need, but then listen. A lot of people have an idea of what they want, what they want to provide. Don't make people your project. When I started using a cane and then stopped because of how people treated me, when I started using a cane, people would come up behind me and grab me and start dragging me where they thought I wanted to go. Apparently, I have resting lost face, and they would start grabbing me. I wouldn't see them, and they didn't say anything. So, and then they couldn't figure out why I was pissed off and not grateful, right? Because they had decided that they were going to help the blind girl, and that is, and then when I wasn't into it, that just burst their bubble. And they did not get to do their good deed for the day, which wasn't that great a deed to begin with because kidnapping is illegal. So, that is just, keep in mind that the person with the disability is the one with the agency. I want to say that this stuff is hardest when you start it. You can build it in and it becomes muscle memory. The first time you do a thing is always the hardest. The second time is only a little bit easier. You will make mistakes, own them, learn from them, move on. Do not grovel, just do the thing. Model behavior in your practice. One of the things that I try to do is I'm not perfect at it, but I try to make my presentations as accessible as possible because that way, other people will be like, I can do that thing too. And as you're doing that, just think about, okay, other people will see what I'm doing. And if people come to you to ask about it, you'll be able to say, did you see me do this thing? I just built it in. It wasn't a big deal. I think that's the biggest thing. It's not a big deal, right? It doesn't have to be a big deal. You just fold it in. And so, those are some of the things that, if you have a specific situation, feel free to come to me with it or bring it up or whatever. But those are the sorts of things that I'm talking about in terms of creating a culture of access and inclusion. And also, nothing about us without us. So when you have, I don't know if there's anybody from leadership here in the university or in your programs or whatever, but if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. So make sure that people with disabilities are part of your leadership, are helping drive things, are compensated for their time. There's a very long history of having us work for free. It is perfectly legal in this country to pay me below minimum wage for doing what I'm doing right now just because I have a disability. Thank God Cambridge doesn't do that, and I wouldn't work for them if they did, but it is completely legal to do that. So don't be those people. Don't be those people. Don't continue that thing. Just make sure that people are leading, that we are included, and also that we are part of the leadership and helping make the decision. And part of, I don't even want to say helping make the decision, making the decisions. Okay, we got a few minutes for questions. Shall we rock and roll?